If it bothers you, what you do with it? You want to do?
I'm not going to.
Okay.
I shall take it.
Maida?
Give us 1 minute for people to sit down and we're going to be like.
I did it. I mean, my childhood buddy wasn't able to hike. She's a hiker. Actually, it turned out nobody hiked. When she can't hike, no one likes. Everyone needs her. And she's going through a lot with her husband. He's an Akron buddy. I did get a nice walk in. Good. And try to
Oh,
exercise.
thank you. Thanks. That's lovely. Thank you. Okay. Well, I know it's difficult to ask us all to depart from the coffee and the cookies outside and to come in here. This is one of the challenges of this room. I completely understand it, but thank you for coming in. I appreciate it, and thank you for being here. I also know there are a number of people who are watching from elsewhere. I know that I have 4 people who've let me know that they're traveling, that they and their spouses are traveling. So thank you for watching wherever you may be. It's nice to be together. And it's nice to be together following something of a break. We've had a little bit of a break that didn't just have to do with the holidays, but also with a trip to Pittsburgh, the museum trip to Pittsburgh, the trip to the Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh. And I understand it was a very successful trip. So congratulations to everybody who has had so much to do with it and arranging it. We're going to continue on our theme of prayer today and are really going to start getting on a roll. And we're going to do this a little bit out of order today. And we're going to be working, we're going to skip a little bit. And we're going to skip a little bit in terms of our liturgy. We're going to, as always, start with a little bit of a review, but very brief. We have quite a bit of material to cover today. And we're going to so do a very brief review and then move on to our material. And my aim is today to set the stage for a discussion that's going to be taking place this week and next week for us about the Shema and the place of the Shema in the liturgy and how the Shema got into the liturgy and why and what does the Shema mean in the context of the liturgy. And I'd like us to talk about this, and I hope that I'm going to be sharing with you things today that you may have not learned in religious school. So that's the purpose of today, and I will do my very best to get there. There's quite a bit of material to get us there. So let's start, and we're going to start with just a very basic review of the questions. And today I'm going to ask you to look at the questions. These are things we put up every week, but I want us to look at question number 5 in particular. What does prayer tell us about our culture, about where we come from, about, in certain ways, our identity, and how, which is related to what is unique about Jewish prayer. How is it Jewish, right? Our culture, and I would like us to really talk about this, to think about this and talk about this as we move forward, and to really ask ourselves this question. And so this is the reason I put this up. And I just want, by way of, again, review, highlight where we've been. We started out talking about biblical prayer. We talked about biblical prayer as being spontaneous and verbal and non-verbal. And we spoke about the prayers of various others. We spoke about the Psalms. We spoke about the Psalms being, in certain ways, organized prayer, in the plural as opposed to the singular, collective identity as opposed to spontaneous individual prayer. We spoke about all of these things when we spoke about biblical prayer. We spoke, I don't know if you remember, about the prayer of Hannah with regard to the birth of Samuel. We spoke about all of these things, but we spoke about biblical prayer, and we moved from biblical prayer to a study of the morning blessings. And we really left off last time with a study of the morning blessings, and what do they mean, and how did we come up with them. And remember, we took a really closer look at the blessing that says, "Asher natan lasechvi bina lavchin ben yom uven laila," God who has given the rooster the ability to understand and to distinguish between day and night. And we spoke about all of this, you remember? And we spoke about the place of the morning blessings and how we prepare for prayer. And we spoke about all of this at some length, and now we can move forward. And so I would really like to move forward, and I'd like to move forward with a thought. And that's the first thought that I'd like to present us with that's going to frame our session today. And the thought is, in the context of our liturgy, in the context of our prayer, we keep moving from rabbinic material and, when possible, our own words, to biblical material. We're back and forth between various historical periods and various texts, basically moving back from rabbinic to biblical to rabbinic to... We are constantly in this back and forth in our liturgy. And the back and forth is not accidental. Bless you. It's not accidental. The back and forth is designed, it is engineered, and it is engineered to create in us a particular sense of identity that brings us back to the Hebrew Bible, that connects Rabbinic Judaism with the Hebrew Bible and the stories and the understandings and the core of the Hebrew Bible. Nowhere is this more apparent and more obvious than the use of the Shema in the liturgy. Nowhere. So the Shema is, of course, the watchword of our faith. It is extraordinarily important. And we want to ask ourselves, where does it come from? How did it get there? Why do we say the Shema? And how do the rabbis understand it? And what do we make of it in context? Why is it one of the pillars of our service, of our religious service, to a point wherein every Jew knows the Shema? Secular, religious, you know, everybody knows the Shema. I don't know if you know the stories, but there are a number of moving, extraordinary stories of rabbis who went to orphanages after the Holocaust and who started singing the Shema and looked around at the children to figure out who reacted to the Shema, because children had their parents sing the Shema to them before they went to bed, as they were going to sleep. And they had a memory of the Shema. And when they heard the Shema again, children reacted. This is how ubiquitous the Shema is in our culture, right? Where does it come from? How did we get there? What is it doing in our liturgy? I want to skip to that moment of the Shema, and we're going to start with it today. Okay. And so we start out with a framing of biblical text and rabbinic language in prayer. I'm going to start with a little bit of historical context. The Shema occurs in the book of Deuteronomy, as you know, in Parshat Vayetchanan, the second Torah portion of the book of Deuteronomy. And it occurs in a really interesting way. And it occurs in a really interesting way in the context of an introduction to what becomes the Hebrew covenant. It is set in a particular historical context. And the historical context is obviously the context of the book of Deuteronomy, and we're going to look at how this came about today. But the context is the context of struggle. It is the context of war. It is the context of defeat. And it is the context of survival and redemption. That's what we're going to start to look at today. That's what we're going to start to really think about today and to start to unpack. Some of what you may hear today may be a little bit surprising, but we're going to start from the beginning. So I'm going to bring you back to the 8th and 7th centuries before the Common Era. And I'm going to bring you back to the moment wherein the beginnings of Jewish identity are conceived. Those moments wherein Judean identity turn into a uniquely new theological approach to the world, religious approach to the world. And part of what we're going to try to figure out is how this happened, why and how this happened. Okay? You ready? Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm going to ask you to turn to 2 Kings, to the book of 2 Kings. I'm not going to put up on the slides everything, but I'm going to ask you to look at 2 Kings chapter 18. And I'm going to ask you to look at it because my slides only cover a fraction of the material. So take a look at it while we're looking at this also on the screen. I would like you to take a look at this because this is the beginning of our story. I'm sorry, what page? 597. 597 in our Bibles. 2 Kings chapter 18. A moment of introduction with regard to 2 Kings chapter 18. We find ourselves in the following moment. As you recall, King David, King Solomon had a unified kingdom of Israel, ruling from Jerusalem, creating palaces and creating a temple in Jerusalem. The kingdom of Israel then splits into 2 kingdoms, Judah to the south, Israel to the north. The capital of Israel becomes Samaria. Israel is a bigger and more important kingdom, a wealthier kingdom than Judah. Judah is relatively small, and Judah has a problem of water. In Judah, largely part of Judah, the largest part of Judah, is either mountains, arid mountains, with relatively little water, or desert. And those areas that have more water in them, toward the sea, are constantly contested for the Judeans by Philistines and others. To add to the woes of Judah, Egypt is the great regional power to the south, and the Philistines, the sea peoples, are on the coast to the west. Okay? Israel is a wealthier, stronger country, less of a problem of water, better agriculture, more wealth in the ground, more people, better trade, a huge amount of trade with Lebanon, with Syria, as far afield as Iraq, a great deal of trade, more militarily powerful, and at various times more expansive. Right? Now, at the time, there are 2 major regional powers. One we spoke about, that's Egypt to the south. The other one is Assyria to the north. Assyria, which is a very old empire, very old, dating back to the 2nd millennium before the Common Era. Assyria, for hundreds of years, is there. Its capital is a city called Nineveh. You heard about Nineveh in the Jonah story, and we spoke about Nineveh. Assyria expands. And around 721 before the Common Era, the 720s before the Common Era, Assyria besieges Samaria, the capital of the kingdom of Israel, defeats Israel and exiles its people. The kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes of Israel, the whole of Israel, is gone. It's finished. By the way, nothing remains of Israel. Nothing remains of the 10 tribes. Nothing. Within a few generations, they're assimilated wherever they were exiled. There is nothing. Not clothing, fashion, cuisine, artifacts, language, religious traditions. Nothing is left. The people of Israel are completely and utterly lost. There is nothing that remains. Okay? The chapter we're looking at is the chapter that starts to describe this. Okay? This tragedy, what has just happened here, is the beginning of Jewish identity, and I'm going to explain how and why. Okay? Here we go. Chapter 18, verses 6 to 9. We have the description of what happens. This is the year 721 before the Common Era. Yes, Michael.
Can I ask you to refresh my memory? At the time when Joshua divided Israel between the tribes, why Judah tribe got this area? And
Oh, okay. So the
when
question...
they divided Israel and Judah
Yes.
in 2 states.
Yes.
Which priesthood
Can't hear
was
you.
to
He'll translate.
north and which one took south?
Yeah.
I believe Moshe tribe priesthood took north.
There are 3 questions. 3 questions. Question number 1 was, how was the land of Israel divided to the tribes to begin with? When Joshua, as it were, or however it was, with the conquest of the land of Israel, how to begin with was the land of Israel divided into tribes? That's question number 1. Question number 2, how did Judah end up where Judah is? And question number 3, with the division of the 2 kingdoms, the kingdom of Judah and Israel, what was the difference between the priesthood of Judah and the priesthood of Israel? These are the 3 questions. So I'm going to divide up my answer to a very brief literary answer and a very brief historical answer. According to the brief literary answer, in the book of Joshua, which follows immediately the book of Deuteronomy, wherein we have signals of this in the book of Deuteronomy, there are clear indications of where the tribes are. In fact, the tribes are in places that are signaled already in the Pentateuch, in the 5 books of Moses. So, for example, we know that Dan is on the sea and Naphtali is in the hills, and we know that, there are different people in different places, different tribes in different places. According to our biblical text, Joshua allows for the tribes to settle in their different places that were predestined, were pre-designed, were pre-allocated by Moses. However, there is historically no indication of that. There's no indication of that. What we know was that there were Canaanites who historically practiced a different kind of life in Canaan, and they occupied both Judah and at times Israel. Now, Judah occupied the south, and does anyone remember where King David comes from? The family of King David, where does the family of King David comes from? What was the center of Judah, the historic center of Judah? Bethlehem, right? Yeah. Bethlehem, in other words, south of Jerusalem, is really the center of the tribe of Judah. This area of the Judean mountains, right, including some of the desert and some of the more arid but not quite desert mountains is the center of Judah, and Judah is there. Eventually, the Israelites capture Jerusalem and make Jerusalem their capital, right? At that point, later on, Jerusalem is incorporated into the kingdom of Israel and Judah, eventually Judah, according to our texts. The priesthood, religious practices. One of the things that we know was that originally there had been multiple places of worship around the land of Israel. You know, initially it wasn't just the temple in Jerusalem. There were temples in different places. People went to different places, to different communities, to worship and to offer sacrifices. There was a movement by a number of priests within a part of the priesthood to centralize the worship and to create a center in Jerusalem at the temple. What we also know is that there was a great diversity of religious practices in the kingdom of Israel, and that in reality, the kingdom of Israel was very diverse and didn't just follow the Mosaic religion. In fact, we are not clear that there was a Mosaic religion to follow at this time, which is part of the reason for which these people disappear. Okay? Here is what the text says, and I want you to look at this. The 4th year of King Hezekiah, the 7th year of King Hosea, King Shalmaneser of Assyria marched against Samaria, besieged it, and captured it at the end of a 3-year siege. Do you understand 3 years of siege? Can you imagine? Lack of food, lack of water, lack of goods for 3 years. Nobody coming in, nobody going out. I mean, can you imagine what 3 years of siege were like? I mean, you know, this is, okay? In the 6th year of Hezekiah, which was the 9th year of King Hosea of Israel, Samaria was captured. This is it. These are the verses that tell the story. Samaria, the capital of Israel, falls. Everything falls apart. The overwhelming majority of the people of Israel are gone. Now it's Judah that remains. Now it's not over. It's not over. It gets worse. Here we go. The king of Assyria deported the Israelites into Assyria, settled them in all these different places. And why, according to the Hebrew Bible? Because they did not obey God, they did not obey the religion, and eventually they were in all of these different places, and they disappeared. They simply disappeared. This is the year 721 before the Common Era. Okay? Yes? So now we move forward. Verses 13 to 16. You can read the rest of it in your books. That's why you have your books open. I want to focus our attention on 2 Kings 18, verses 13 to 16. Now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sancherib marches against the fortified cities and towns of Judah and seizes all of them. Judah is now attacked. Assyria is a superpower. Everything is seized, right? And the king tries to negotiate. Hezekiah tries to negotiate with the Assyrians. Why do the Assyrians attack Judah? Because Judah tried to rebel against the Assyrians with Egyptian help. They sought the help of the other regional superpower, Egypt, to rebel against Assyria. The Assyrians didn't like it and came back in force. Right? They've captured the whole of Judah. Jerusalem remains. Hezekiah tries to negotiate, and the king of Assyria imposes a horrific penalty on Judah. Okay? So, a payment of 300 talents of silver, and beyond the silver, 30 talents of gold, and he basically empties out all the treasures of the palace, all the treasures of the temple. Everything is given off to the Assyrians. All the silver, all the gold. They even take down the doors, which are now gold-plated. Hezekiah had them gold-plated. They take apart the doors and they ship them off to Assyria as penalty for the revolt against the Assyrians. They are impoverished, right? This is the penalty. This is the penalty for this revolt against the Assyrians. Okay. They understand. Revolt against the Assyrians. It didn't work. The Assyrians have attacked them. They have sacked the cities of Judah. Nothing remains but for Jerusalem and its environs. Hezekiah negotiates and pays a huge penalty. This is the story. Yes? Okay? You understand where we are, where we stand? It's not over. And it's not over because the king of Assyria, the emperor of Assyria, sends a huge army to Jerusalem and besieges Jerusalem. He just took all the money, all the gold, all the silver from Jerusalem. Leave the people alone. No, he sends a huge army to Jerusalem, and they besiege Jerusalem. Remember, Tyre, Sidon, Samaria, I can name 1.5 dozen city-states that all fall to Assyria. Assyria is the superpower. Egypt is relatively weak, is a little bit weaker. Assyria is the power at the time. Everything falls to Assyria. Jerusalem is a small city. It's a small place. Sends an army to besiege Jerusalem. Rav Shakeh, which is the name of it's a title. It's the name of an office. It means the minister or the official who is responsible for all the libations, all the drinks of the government in the empire. Right? In other words, a high official is being sent to lead this army that besieges Jerusalem. They arrive in Jerusalem and they summon the king to the wall of the city. They summon King Hezekiah to the wall of the city. Here they are, they're besieging the city, and the official Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, goes in the name of the king to the wall to face up to the generals, the leaders of the Assyrian army that is now besieging Jerusalem. And here is what they say. You tell Hezekiah, thus said the great king, not you, little king, the great king, right, of Assyria, what makes you so confident? What gave you the confidence to rebel against me? Who the hell do you think you are? To rebel against Assyria. What on earth do you think you are doing? Right? And of course, you can read the other pieces of the passage. Relying on Egypt, an unreliable partner, what do you think that you were doing? However, more so, the speech of Rav Shakeh, which is spoken in Judean, in Proto-Hebrew, the man knew Hebrew. And he spoke in Hebrew so that everybody would understand. You are relying on your God, the God of Judah, the God of Jerusalem, to save Jerusalem? Wait a minute, Hezekiah. Aren't you the guy who removed all the worship? of your God from all other cities outside Jerusalem? You think that your God is going to protect you after you stopped all the worship of God in all the other cities of Judah outside Jerusalem? Right? Who do you think told me to come up here and destroy Jerusalem? Your God told me to come up and destroy. They say this in Judean, in Proto-Hebrew, with everybody listening on the walls. This is one of the finest pieces of propaganda ever produced. This puts 20th century, 21st century politics to shame. What they knew, what they were able to do, right? Okay, to a point wherein Eliakim, the official says to Rav Shakeh, please don't speak Hebrew. Everybody can understand you. I speak Aramaic. Speak in Aramaic so that the other people don't understand. I will deliver your message to the king, to King Hezekiah. Don't speak in Judean. So that, look at what you're saying to everybody. And Rav Shakeh says, wait a minute, who do you think I'm speaking to? You? I'm speaking to everybody who's now standing on the walls, who in a moment are not going to have food, are not going to have water, are not going to be able to survive. These are the people I'm speaking to. This is a piece of politics, of propaganda and of military strategy that is, the fact that we have this is extraordinary. Now this occurs at the turn of the 8th century before the Common Era. We are now around the year 701 before the Common Era. Okay? And look at all the countries, look at all the states, look at all the places that couldn't be saved from the Assyrians. All the other gods that everybody prayed to in all the other cities. Your God is going to save Jerusalem against our army? Look at the speech. In the context of the speech here, chapter 18, he says to him, the king of Assyria will give you 2,000 horses, but you don't have the men to ride them. I mean, they laugh. Rav Shakeh laughs at the Judeans. He laughs at King Hezekiah. Right? Who do you think you are? What do you think you are doing? And what is this? It is not just an attack on Jerusalem. It's not just an attack on Judea. It's not just an attack on the rebellion, the revolt against Assyria, which was a terrible mistake, right? It's an attack on the God of Jerusalem. Who the hell is this God who's going to defend Jerusalem from us, right? You know, let me show you my artillery and see what your God is going to do. Right? Yes? This is where we are. Jerusalem is in crisis. The other cities of Syria, Lebanon, the kingdom of Israel, the cities of the Philistines, Lachish, all fall to the Assyrians. Hezekiah prays to God and says to God, God, do something, you must save us. You must save this city. Here I am trying to do my best. You must save the city, and the words are here, the words that Sancherib has sent to blaspheme the living God. Look at what is happening here. We are, imagine the situation of Hezekiah holed up now in Jerusalem with his people. He sends word to a prophet. The prophet is Isaiah. The prophet Isaiah. And Isaiah says, hold on, not so fast, wait, Jerusalem will be okay. Jerusalem will be okay. We do not know what happens. Hezekiah prays, God, deliver us from the hands of the Assyrians. Let everybody know that you are the true God, you alone, right? And what ends up happening here is basically the following. Isaiah says, he shall not shoot an arrow at it. The Assyrians will not conquer the city. They will not advance upon it with shield. They will not be able to maintain a siege against it. They will go back the way that this is all about Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. They will not be able to do this. I will protect the city for the sake of my name and for the sake of my servant David. That night, according to Kings 19, we're now in Kings 19, that night, something happened. Soldiers of the Assyrian army died, and King Sennacherib broke camp, decided to break camp, and remove the siege of Jerusalem and move his army away. And Jerusalem remained intact. What happened? We don't know. We have no idea. A number of scholars and archaeologists believe it was food poisoning. A number of people believe it was some kind of a sickness like food poisoning. The army was decimated. Something happened there. By the way, the Assyrians also had other military issues to deal with in other places. Jerusalem was maybe not their top priority. This little city in the middle of Judah, like in the, practically on the boundaries of the desert, wasn't such a big deal for them, wasn't such a big priority for them. They left Jerusalem alone. This is the beginning of Judaism. This is the beginning of the faith, of the belief. One second, I'll be right with you. This is the beginning of the understanding that our God, the God of little Jerusalem, protected Jerusalem against the Assyrians. This is the conception of Judaism. What did not happen in Samaria happened in Jerusalem. Yes? This is the very beginning of our story. The turn of the 8th to the 7th century before the Common Era. Yes?
Is this the story where they woke up and like 160,000 were dead? Like they were all...
Yeah, there weren't 160,000 to begin with. Yeah, I mean, the numbers are, but yes, that's what the Bible says, yeah? The Hebrew Bible says there were, 100 and, there were, all of these people were slain, 185,000, yes, that's the story, right? But no, there weren't 185,000. At the time, an army of 5,000 to 10,000 was huge. And remember, Jerusalem was the size of a quarter of Beechwood. Physically, geographically, Jerusalem was tiny. You didn't need 185,000 troops to surround Jerusalem, right? There weren't 185,000 troops, right? But the Assyrians had a massive army and the ability to muster a huge army. Right? This is what happens here. This is our story. Okay? Okay, this is our story. This is the inception of, if you like, the very beginning of the notion of a special God that is a God that governs everything and that can stand up even to the Assyrians. Right? This is the beginning of that idea. a universal God that is above everything else, the God that protects Jerusalem. Why are we talking about all of this? We're talking about all of this because of the implications of it for Judean culture and for the interaction between the Judeans and the people around them. Take a look at what happens here. At the very end of the chapter, very end of this entire episode, Sancherib goes back, he goes off, he worships in his temple, and his two children, according to this particular narrative, kill him. In other words, there's a coup. These children kill him, they smite him with a sword. They flee to the land of Ararat, which is today Asia, today Turkey. And his son, Esarhaddon, succeeds him as king. Esarhaddon is the father of Ashurbanipal, who is the emperor who expands the Assyrian Empire beyond everything we had known before. The Assyrian Empire becomes the single largest empire the world had ever known under Emperor Ashurbanipal, whose father is Esarhaddon, right? Yes? This is the story. Now we are in the 7th century before the Common Era. Yes?
So how long after the incident did the scholars get together and decide that this was the inception of Judaism?
This is 20th century. We now are putting the pieces of the puzzle together.
Okay, so at the time they didn't say, aha. No. Good.
You know, that's a great question, Marie. No, that's a great question, Marie. The question is, how do these, what are the seeds that give rise to, this is one of those seeds, right? It's a great question. The question is, how do we know this is the start of Judean identity, right? Look, what I'm trying to say is something really amazing. We have to struggle with a really amazing question. The year 720 before the Common Era, the Israelite kingdom is defeated and exiled. Nothing remains. Nothing. By the way, the Israelites are not unique. They're not unique. There are a whole bunch of other kingdoms, city-states, with their own cultures, their own religions, they're taken over by Assyria, they're taken over by these empires. Nothing remains. Nothing remains of these cultures. They disappear. They're wiped off the face of the earth. The Judeans are defeated and exiled in the year 587 before the Common Era. About 130, 140 years after this story, they're exiled, they're defeated. But they survive. Their culture survives. Their religion survives. Their language survives. Their literature survives. And if they didn't, we wouldn't be here today. What happens in this period of 130 years that makes the difference? How did this happen? Why did the Israelites lose their identity? Why did they become assimilated and completely, why is there nothing left of them? Whereas the Judeans, here we're still reading this. This is our material. What happened? Right? Yes? Okay, so a few, Lynn.
I just want to ask, a question that maybe others know, but we're talking about the Assyrian king was killed.
Yes.
His son. Okay. And the two that killed him fled.
Yes.
The one that was still around succeeded him.
Yes.
So did you say this successor was worse of a king and didn't?
No, well, it actually expanded the empire. From the Assyrian perspective, was a great king. Well, from the Assyrian perspective, expanded the empire. And his son, Ashurbanipal, even greater, created the largest, in fact, conquered part of Egypt. The Assyrian Empire starts in Persia and all the way to Egypt. The largest empire the world had ever seen. Yes? And the Judeans somehow survive. Right. Margie.
I was just going to ask you whether it's partly the prophetic vision of Isaiah and the early prophets that were carried into Babylonia that helped survive.
Something, thank you, Margie, for the question. Again, what helped the Judeans survive? What helped that culture survive? Partly the vision of Isaiah, partly the literary texts, partly the culture wherein we remember a Moses, we remember a lawgiver, we remember practices. We eat a little bit differently. We have our own language, we have our own culture, we have our own worship. These differences stick. And when they stick, and when they remain in exile, a people survives, right? And it's partly the liturgy, and it's partly the prophecy, it's partly the texts, it's partly the customs. And then it's partly the notion we want to marry people who are like us, right? We want to somehow maintain a sense of identity within our group. Lo and behold, the culture survives. Yes? But I don't want to oversimplify this, but something happens that allow this culture to survive, and there's no question that the vision of Isaiah is part of that survival. Yes, Eti.
I think it's obvious that suddenly everybody realized, including the Judeans, that our God is invincible and omnipotent, and that's what carried us through.
And suddenly, that's exactly right. And maybe this was the point, Eti. Thank you for saying that, because that's part of what I'm trying to get across. With the survival of Jerusalem, there is a possibility that the people of Jerusalem and of Judah say, ooh, our God is special. Even the Assyrians, who conquered everything, were unable to conquer Jerusalem.
That also gave
Right?
Jerusalem a special status.
And as Jerusalem a special status, and so on and so forth. Absolutely. Absolutely. Right? And this is perhaps where it comes from. Now, Jerusalem is defeated by the Babylonians in 587, and the great status of Jerusalem and the great God who protected Jerusalem, Jerusalem is defeated, the temple is destroyed, everything is burned down, complete and utter disaster, complete catastrophe, the very end of the book of Kings 2, right? But that occurs more than 100 years later. Yes? In the meantime, something is going on. Now, I want us to talk about Esarhaddon for a moment and his son, Ashurbanipal. Esarhaddon creates a massive empire. And when Esarhaddon becomes the emperor of Assyria, he sends treaties to the various vassal kings and rulers all around his empire. And it is a treaty wherein he establishes his successor as his son, Ashurbanipal, and he demands the loyalty of all the kings, all the vassals, to him and to his son. Or else. Now, the treaty we know about because we believe, archaeologists and scholars believe, that about 200 of these exemplars were sent to various kings, various vassals. 200 of them. And we found a copy of that in Syria, in Tel Taniat, in Syria, in northern Syria. We found a copy of that treaty. There was another copy that was partially found in Iraq. But now we know that there were a number of different copies in different places. Now, I want to share with you a tiny little part of what that treaty says. And I want to share it with you in the context of what we know about the Shema. Can you think about the Shema for a moment? Yes? Okay. Okay, the COL here, by the way, I want you to know I'm using the translation of Donald John Wiseman. Many of you you may not know who Donald John Wiseman was. He was a major Assyriologist. I'm going to speak about him if I have the time in a moment. Here is what column 4, the following lines, 226 to 228 says. Everything is with a language of swearing. You take an oath that. But what does it say? It says, every line here says, you will take an oath that. You will love Ashurbanipal, the crown prince, son of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, your lord, as you do yourselves. Does this sound familiar? Yes. And then, column 288 to 290. You will relate these things to your sons and to your grandsons, to your seed and to your seed's seed, which shall be born in the future. Does this sound familiar? Does this sound familiar? And then in another place, it says, and I'm just giving you snippets, right, of this treaty, right? And it says here, you will speak with heartfelt truth. You will speak with Ashurbanipal. Forgive the typo here. It should say with. With Ashurbanipal, with heartfelt truth, you will protect him in country and in town. Right? Does this ring a bell? Yes? Beshivtecha beveitecha uvelechtecha baderech. When you're sitting in your house and when you're going on the road. Right? In town and in country. Yes? Okay. And what I say here will not make a claim against the document bearing the seal of Ashur. The king of all gods, you will not, don't you dare make a claim against anything that comes from us. It is in your presence. It is in your presence. Right? You will serve him as your God. Sound familiar? Scholars believe this treaty was composed in the year 762 before the Common Era. Now, I don't know whether they taught you about this in religious school. I don't know whether you've learned about this before. But it turns out, this, by the way, was found in the year 1949-1950. The archaeological excavation in Tel Taniyat occurred in 1949-1950. Donald John Wiseman, whose translation I use here, published it in the 1950s. He was the Assyriologist in the United Kingdom, in Britain. Wiseman was born at the very end of the First World War. He was an intelligence officer for the British Army during the Second World War and was tremendously important in North Africa and in the south of Italy. A major Assyriologist, became the director of the Museum of all archaeological artifacts in Iraq, I believe once or twice, was a professor at the University of London, and a major Assyriologist. One of my great regrets, by the time I arrived in England, he was long retired and I never had an opportunity to meet him and to speak with him and let alone to study with him and to work with him. Really a remarkable figure. One day we will talk about, this person, about Donald John Wiseman. Really remarkable, and his father and, what they had done. It turns out that maybe the Shema is not an original piece of literature that was composed by Moses. It turns out that maybe the Shema is inspired by something else. Maybe there is something here in the Shema that reflects ancient Near Eastern traditions and that reflect this pledge of allegiance to the most powerful king and God the world had known in the context of Assyria. Now, let's try to set the table and to put the pieces together in preparation for next week. It would have been very, very unwise, I think, for the people of Judah to come up with a Shema that worships their own God when the Assyrians were at the height of their power. I think it would have been, yes, it would have, thank you. I appreciate this, Mel. Thank you for saying that. Mel said suicide. It would have been poorly regarded, I was going to say. It would have been poorly regarded by the Assyrians. The Assyrians wouldn't appreciate it. Right? The likelihood is that the Shema is composed, inspired by this, when the Assyrians are in retreat. But imagine the insight, the courage, and the chutzpah of a bunch of Judean scribes who are taking this Assyrian pledge and saying, no, we're not pledging allegiance to your God. We're not pledging allegiance to the Assyrian king. We are pledging allegiance to our God. The God of Israel. We recognize our God as the true God, the true king, the true sovereign. We are going to take your language and we're going to turn it around. And this is going to become our theology, our God. And in reality, the pledge of allegiance of the Jewish people. To this day, to this very day. Think about what happened here. Think about the intelligence of people who take this language and who say, ooh, yeah, we're going to teach it to our children. Yeah, we're going to talk about this when we're home and when we're on the way. Yes, we're going to love our God. It's going to be our God. This is going to be our understanding of the world. Our conception. You, the Assyrians, you will come, you will go. We will remain. Little Judah, tiny little Jerusalem, that escaped Assyria by the skin of its teeth. The genius that is the central part of our liturgy to the very day. This is where it comes from. Isn't this remarkable? Yes.
Couldn't it have been reversed so that the Assyrians who were absorbing so many cultures actually borrowed all of this language from somebody else and made it their own?
Could it have been the reverse, is the question. Is it possible that the Assyrians took this from us? That we, the Judeans, our ancestor, were the original authors, creators of this, and the Assyrians said, oh, this is a good idea. We're going to use it in our treaties. This is what we're going to do. Highly unlikely. Highly unlikely. The language of the Shema is late 7th century Hebrew. Highly unlikely. There is much older Hebrew. We see traces of it in the Hebrew Bible, not the Shema. The book of Deuteronomy, as a whole, is a relatively late book. Right? Highly, highly unlikely. Right? Yes? we're going to talk about other elements of this, but I'm going to offer you yet another response. Let me just take one more question, and then I'll come back to you. Yes, Aline.
I kind of alluded to it. I was trying to understand the timing. So this is included in Deuteronomy. This is basically the Temple-Tifereth, which we say. So when do we think this was written in? When was this incorporated into Deuteronomy?
Different scholars, the question is, when was this material, the Ve'ahavta, Deuteronomy chapter 6, incorporated into the book of Deuteronomy? When was the book of Deuteronomy composed? In my view, there is early material in the book of Deuteronomy that makes its way to the book of Deuteronomy, in my view, and in the view of a number of other scholars. I'm not alone. The book of Deuteronomy is a product of the second half of the 7th century and the turn, right? In other words, between 600 and 650 and the turn from the 7th to the 6th century. That, in my view, right, is and I will tell you why. In 587 before the Common Era, Jerusalem is destroyed, the temple is destroyed, burnt down, everybody's exiled. By the time Cyrus, the Persian, takes over from the Babylonian Empire and allows the Judeans to return to Palestine, to return to Judah, to return to Jerusalem, we're already in the early part of the 7th century. The book of Deuteronomy includes references to a redemption and return of exiles. How did they know? How did they know? Right? In my view, it couldn't be before that. Right? It couldn't be before that. But there's yet another element here. The treaty of Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal to the vassals is a treaty among kings, leaders of countries, right? And they are responsible in the eyes, these vassals are responsible in the eyes of the emperor, right? They are responsible for maintaining and making sure everything goes well. And if they don't, they're going to suffer the consequences. They and their people are going to suffer the consequences. This is how empires work, right? What do the scribes here do with the Shema? The Shema is private. It's private. It's ours. It's every person in his or her home. It's us, each and every one of us, speaking to our children. It's our own pledge of allegiance. It's not a collective thing that is said in the temple or that is said by the king or that is, no. We say it. We say it. Why do we say it? Because there is no king. There is no high priest. There is no temple. And if it's not going to be for us, our culture, our Judaism will not survive. It's about us and our children. If we don't teach our children, there will be nothing. So what we're seeing here is a public document. We found it in a palace in Tel Taniyat in northern Syria, in a royal palace, which is where it was supposed to be. The Shema is a different story. But that already starts leading us on to next week. Yes, Maida.
How did these people who had 2 centuries before been a Jewish community and are no longer really in any kind of a community? Was it only the people in Jerusalem who maintained any sense of their God? What happened to all the other Jews out there? How did they keep their religion alive? Or didn't they?
So the question is, how did this work? How did people maintain their culture, their identity, their community when community was lost? How did they do this? Most of them didn't. Most of them didn't. So what happens is a minority of people maintain these links to the community, to the congregation, and these people are basically the core of the Judeans, right? We are their descendants. We are their descendants of the whole of that state, a whole nation state of Israel, the northern kingdom. There is nothing. Okay?
And the reason I'm asking is because I have recently found a cousin who grew up in Soviet Union, whose his great-great-grandfather was a rabbi, and the whole community revolved around him. This young man, who is now 27, 28, has no Judaism.
Well, so Maida, you're raising the question with regard to contemporary issues and contemporary Jewish identity and what happened during the time of the Soviet Union.
Exactly.
And we know what happened in the time of the Soviet Union, and we know why so many Jews lost their Jewish identity in the Soviet Union, and how many of them are reclaiming their Jewish identity following the fall of the Soviet Union. This is part of the story. It's
So
part.
That reflects exactly what was happening.
This has always happened, except that this time it gave rise to our identity. This is who we are. Us here. This is who we are. This is what we're descended from. And when you think about the genius of the composition of the Shema, the genius of it, because it is our pledge of allegiance. There is a reason for which it's the pillar of our service. And look at the genius of those who turned this around and who said, nope, we're going to do this differently. This was our introduction to the Shema. And we're going to continue with the Shema next week. Eti, please. Yes.
Just a short comment. We just came back from Portugal.
Yes.
We did a Jewish heritage tour there, and we were in Belmonte, Trancoso, everywhere. And we heard a very interesting story that 100 years ago, Samuel Schwartz, who was a Polish Jewish mine engineer, he came to that region and he saw that people practiced something familiar to him. And he confronted them, he told them that he is a Jew, and they didn't believe him because they were crypto-Jews. They were hiding his. So he recited Shema, and it opened their eyes. It started their whole process of converting back to Judaism and recognition as Jews. So these were crypto-Jews, and what connected them, that Polish engineer, Ashkenazi Jew, and the crypto-Jews, that was the Shema.
Eti, thank you for sharing the story with regard to Portugal and the crypto-Jews of Portugal. And you know that the story doesn't just extend to Portugal. Latin America and South America, all of those Jews who migrated, the crypto-Jews who migrated, and these cultures, this is the strength of the survival of a culture. When there is a determination, when there's a commitment, and of course the crypto-Jews had communities. They strengthened each other. They knew who other crypto-Jews were, right? And they maintained this over generations. They passed on traditions as safely as they could over hundreds of years. But I wanted to share this with you. I wanted to show this to you. I wanted you to understand that Moses or some scribe didn't just come up with a Shema. The Shema, the story of the Shema, the history of the Shema, the literary inspiration of the Shema, in my view, adds to its significance. It explains to us things that we would never understand about the Shema. And it offers us a glimpse into the birth of what is our culture and our nation. Yes, Alina?
You may touch upon this next week, but presumably at this time, the Sabbath was still something that was observed. Did this become part of, when did this become part of our Shabbat liturgy? When did we, because we say this every week, right?
Right. So,
Was that
so the question of Shabbat and the question of when did this become part of the liturgy, all of this we're going to touch on. This actually becomes part of our liturgy only in the first millennium to the Common Era. Hundreds of years later, right? In reality, in our liturgy, it's daily. We say this daily, the Shema, not just on Shabbat, but it becomes part of our liturgy daily and on Shabbat. We're going to talk about how this happens, how this evolves, and how this becomes so central, but you're starting to have an understanding of it and of what this represents. I'm going to let you go. Have a wonderful rest of your day.